All right. Well, we will go ahead and dive in. Thanks, y'all, for being here. We're going to hear more from these wonderful people soon, but I'll just briefly say right off the bat, thanks, Katie Trazo, for being here and all the organization she's been putting into the back end of this. Thanks to Dr. Ryan Huish and Dana Beagle for also being here with us tonight. It's hard. It can be really hard to make time. So we really appreciate your precious hours. We know you have busy lives and farms and families. So thank you. All right. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm Emilie Tweardy. I work for Appalachian Sustainable Development as an agroforester. We've also got Katie Trazo here, who is Dr. Katie Trazo, who is in the Virginia Tech Center for Food Systems and Community Transformation. And she has been helping out with Ask an Agroforester this year throughout our winter series. And we've got one session left in that, but she has been an amazing help. And she's here in the background. You want to say hi?
Hey,
She's like,
everybody.
nah. All right, here's where we're headed. We're going to talk a little bit about how what it takes to bring this about. We'll do a quick poll, intro to speakers. The speakers are going to have time to give presentations, and then we've got our live Q&A at the end. And the live Q&A is split into two sections. So we have some like pre-prepared questions from things that people have submitted ahead of time. And then we've also got the live section where everyone can just go nuts and ask questions. So a little bit about Appalachian Sustainable Development, ASD. Our mission is to build a thriving regional food and ag system that creates healthy communities, respects the planet, and cultivates profitable opportunities for Appalachians. As I mentioned, I work on the agroforestry team at ASD, and we do all kinds of fun work, but we also have all these other departments. We do workforce development, agriculture education, food access, economic development, resources management, all kinds of really, really good programming. So please take some time to check out asdevelop.org. If you are just interested in any of those subjects, we also have a really, really robust set of resources pages that have all kinds of information and links to follow through. We also have agroforestry trainings for natural resources professionals. So if this stuff is interesting to you, if you're a deep dive person, maybe you work for NRCS or DOF or Extension, or maybe you're a private consultant and you'd like to learn more formally about agroforestry, we've got a really great set of online trainings. And you can find those at learnagroforestry.com. This was a big collaborative effort. You can see all the partners across the bottom, but we've got modules for all of the agroforestry practices, and we've got a couple free modules too. We've got an intro to agroforestry, and we've got social competencies, which are both free. And then the other classes, you can piecemeal them or get a bundle. And for the amount of content that you receive for those, it's honestly a phenomenal deal. So check those out. And we also have field days associated with some of those. So there are farm tours and field days that happen in association with that and are like deeper dives that you can do in person. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Katie to talk about all that it takes and all our amazing partners and some other offerings that are a part of these collaborations.
Yeah, hey everybody. Next slide. So we're able to collaborate through a specific project that's funded by the Southern SARE, and it's a professional development grant project, and we're looking at expanding an agroforestry regional knowledge exchange. So that's a way for us to learn from one another about this practice, and it's a partnership project, so all the folks on the slide are part of it. Next slide, please. And so what is what we call the ARC Exchange? It's a peer-to-peer learning network between farmers, NGO folks, universities, technical service providers, and ag educators. It's a way for us to share information with one another, whether they're farm tours, webinars, recorded videos, especially being shared by folks on the ground that are practicing this. And we have this footprint in the Appalachian states and beyond. If you'd like to join that listserv, I'll put a link in the chat. There's a website coming soon, and there will be more farm tours as well. So I will pass it back to, oh wait, there's one more slide. Yeah, so these are some of the grants and partnerships that we're able to support that. So really want to give recognition to the Catalyzing Agroforestry Grants Program, led by our colleagues John Munsell and Ian Nichols, And then also, as Emilie mentioned, with the agroforestry trainings, that's a big piece of what's able to support the ARC Exchange, as well as the project I just mentioned. So I'll pass it back to Emilie.
Awesome. And we are going to share a quick poll to actually, part of this is because we need to record this for grants, and part of it is so that we can show our panelists, sorry, I couldn't talk and click at the same time, what kind of folks are in the crowd. So are you all seeing that?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so this helps give us a little bit of an idea of who's out there and what kind of audience we might be speaking to. But this is also really important metrics for us to record. So I encourage you to go for it. And we'll give it just a minute. While y'all are doing that, I'm going to go through a couple slides. I just want to say that our last session, which was really fun with Adam Taylor of Catawba Sustainability Center, that topic was management of diverse agroforestry systems. That one is now up on YouTube, so check that out. And this is the playlist that we've got going so far. No, this isn't just this season. This is a bunch of different ones. But you can see we've got a really robust playlist with all kinds of different fun stuff. So feel free to check out the Ask an Agroforester playlist. And we also have another awesome session coming up, Land Access and Agroforestry, on May 29th with Ebony Alexander and Zev Friedman. So it looks like we've got about 30% just farmer, and remaining are both farmer and natural resource professionals. Oh, wait, no. 30% farmer, the rest other. So maybe our other folks would feel free to share in the chat what kind of work they get up to. All right, so let's see. I think we're at nearly the end here. All right, so here are our two lovely guests today. I'm going to go ahead and read both the bios now, just so that I don't have to like pop back on and screen share again. But we are going to have Dana presenting first and then Ryan afterwards. So let me get my bios in front of me. All right. Dana Beegle, we're so happy to have you here, Dana. Thank you for making time for us. And it was really fun reading your bio and getting to know a little bit more about you, because I've seen your name a lot. Like, I feel like we're just kind of in the same circles. And then, as people will learn from your bio in a minute, there's a publication that you helped develop, and I'm not sure if you were the sole author or how that worked out, but that I use and recommend to people a lot. So it was really fun to find that out about you. So thank you for being here. Dana Beegle is a mother, educator, and practicing agroforester from Floyd County, Virginia. She owns and operates Stone Root Farm with her husband and children, where they specialize in silvopasture-raised beef and forest farm shiitake mushrooms and ramps. She has a master's degree in agroforestry from Virginia Tech, where she developed the tree selection guide for Mid-Atlantic Silvopastures. Dana is also a former high school teacher and passionate about educating the next generation of agroforesters. She has worked with local high school ag programs and student groups at Virginia Tech to create hands-on agroforestry-based learning opportunities on her farm. So welcome, Dana. And Ryan, another person whose name I have just like heard left, right, and center since I started working at ASD. And it's been so fun to finally put a face to the name and to get to run into you at conferences recently. And I really look forward to getting to deepen that connection. But I'm particularly interested to hear tonight about your ethnobotany background. So I'm excited for us to dive into that. Ryan Huish is an ethnobotanist and associate professor of biology at the University of Virginia's College at Wise, deep in the Appalachians of far Southwest Virginia. With a background in botany and sociocultural anthropology, his research interests incorporate an interdisciplinary approach to address basic and applied questions in ethnobotany, ecology, plant conservation, and the preservation of biocultural knowledge. Some of his research topics include Appalachian ethnobotany, native food plants, and forest farming of medicinal and edible plants. He and his family are stewards of Appalachian Cove Forest Farm and Homestead, where they practice and demonstrate various agroforestry principles, including silvopasture, alley cropping, forest farming, multifunctional riparian buffer zones, and native plant agriculture. All right. So with that, welcome both of you. I'm going to stop sharing and I am going to hand it over to Dana to share her screen and give her a presentation. And you are muted,
All right.
Dana.
I'm just unmuted. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yep, we're good.
Let me, I actually meant to put this on slideshow before. I hope that everyone can see that okay. Awesome. Okay. Well, I am super excited to be here today. So thank you for having me. I kind of titled my talk, but we're really talking about youth engagement and educating youth, but I like to think of it as reaching the next generation of agroforesters. So hopefully here we have our first generation here. Actually, really since agroforestry has been around so long, we've had many generations before us, but how do we reach that next generation? And so that's kind of how I like to think about it. Uh-oh, how do I advance my slide? Oh, there we go. Since we do have a few folks that maybe agroforestry is kind of a new topic, I'll just very, very briefly explain what it is, just so we're all on the same page. Oh, and I forgot to start timer. But basically, I mean, the name says it all. It's the combination of agriculture and forestry. It's integrating those things in a very intentional way to create these sustainable production systems. So it could be any kind of woody plant, tree or shrub, that you then combine with crops or livestock in the same sort of system. So for, say, a cattle rancher, it might be planting trees in your pastures, or for a sheep farmer, trees in your pastures. If you're a row crop producer, you would integrate rows of woody plants with your rows of crops. There's also riparian buffers, which can be production oriented, that help protect our streams and waterways, and several other systems that are part of agroforestry. It's important to note that agroforestry is not new thing. It's an ancient practice. It's been around for a really long time. We have a lot left to learn about it. So that's important as well. And it is a climate smart practice, meaning, I mean, anytime we're putting trees into a system, it really, it brings in all those ecosystem services and that carbon sequestration, and it's just an intelligent design all the way around. So that's kind of agroforestry in a super small nutshell. As far as integrating youth into agriculture, engaging them, finding learning opportunities, I thought it's first to kind of think about, like, when I started planning for this talk, like, what are our goals if we're doing that? Because that really helps us kind of find what we're, the ways that we want to do this. So I think of it as four main goals. First, we just want to cultivate awareness. Like, what is agroforestry? I mean, even in this group, there might be still, some of us learning what that really is. So creating awareness of it. And then kind of the doing piece, the engagement, the hands-on, where you're making connections. And then, of course, with that, you're learning and skill building. And I do think of these kind of as one piece, because you're doing them at the same time. And then the fourth goal I think of is creating ownership. So finding ways where you get the youth excited so that they want to go home and do it in their backyards, or they want to do it on their properties. So those are the goals I think of when I think of youth engagement. Now, when I think about all this, I realize it really has a lot to do with, like, how we approach this is going to have to do with our backgrounds. And so here's my background, my lens for how I would approach youth engagement and learning. As Emilie said, I'm mostly worked with K-12 ages. I've taught a lot of different things like horticulture, environmental sciences, regular science, ag education. So I think in those worlds. Populations I've worked with, of course, my family, I do have children, and I have homeschooled for a while. I've been a public school teacher, but I've also worked for organizations that did field trip programs. So I think in those lines too, field trip programs for schools. I am currently a Scout leader and have been for many years. So I think about opportunities with youth engagement through Scouting, as well as in public spaces. So I, for several years, worked at a public garden in Arboreta in Seattle. So did a lot of school programming there. I've also worked for national parks and nature centers, leading field trips and nature hikes and that sort of thing. So when I think of all those things, and I think, how would you get started in youth education for agroforestry? I think kind of there's like two parts to it. The first is I would think we should start with our own youth networks. And the second part is to then look for partners out there. So beyond our own little networks, looking out and seeing what existing youth programs there are that we can be part of. So if we look at our own networks, that will include things like, here's a picture of my family. So it includes, of course, if you have children, includes your children. But it also includes other youth relatives like nieces and nephews, or if you have grandkids. But we also have youth in other parts of our lives. So we might have friends with children, and we can find opportunities to invite them to our farms to teach them about agroforestry that we have going on. And that same goes for neighbors and, say, coworkers that have children. They can also be invited to come and learn from you. And I put customers on here because I think this is a really great inner network that some of us have that are producers, where maybe, like, for example, we sell pastured beef and our customers come to our farm to pick it up, and they almost always bring their kids. And so we almost always, as long as we have time, but we'll ask them, hey, let's go take a walk out and look at the silvopasture. You want to see some of the new trees we just planted? Oh, you don't know what silvopasture is? Well, let me tell you all about it. So these are great opportunities for that. I like to think of, like, with our networks and our own children, maybe I say on our farm, we grow shiitakes, ramps, silvopastured beef, and we also grow agroforesters. So within those networks, and looking back at our goals of awareness, engagement, and ownership, like, what are some of those opportunities that we might have to reach those networks? So I mentioned a couple of them before, like when you invite your neighbors or your coworkers or customers to come tour your site, explain what you're doing and why. Your nieces and nephews, if they're coming for Easter, let's go walk through our food forest. Let's go walk out and along the riparian buffer, those kinds of things. And then you might invite them. Hey, come back. We're plugging mushroom logs next week. Come back and join us. And that's where the engagement would happen. So some hands-on projects that you might do on your own property is, of course, involve your kids, if you can, in the planning. Things like species selection. You can ask them what they like to eat and involve them in those decisions. Of course, when the doing starts, get them involved in, like, planting trees and putting in some golden seal, and maybe they even have their own special tree they've planted and they look after. Harvesting, for sure. That's where you get to really, go out and enjoy the fruits of your labor, like literally. Look up, recipes, cook together, that kind of thing. And then I put mushroom plugging on here because we do a lot of shiitake mushroom plugging, and that's a way that we use a lot for engagement. And then, of course, ownership. I'm leaving that blank for now. I'll get back to that in a little bit. So in terms of, like, creating awareness and engagement, I think of it, when I'm thinking of my examples from my own family, I think of small people doing big things, giving the little guys an opportunity to do important and be involved in important things on your property. So one of the big things that we do with our kids is to involve them in our mushroom operation. This is part of our mushroom laying yard, and it's big. We maintain about 500 or 600 logs year round. And so we need their help. We start off every spring, and our kids, these are old pictures. Our kids, I've got 2 graduated from college now. And so some of these are older pictures, but they've grown up as mushroom farmers, basically shiitake farmers. But every spring, and we still do this, we go out and harvest logs for mushroom plugging. And so it doesn't really matter how old they are. They're either working together to carry logs, or if they get old enough to run the chainsaw, they're learning how to buck up logs and fell trees. They're learning how to maintain their equipment and that sort of thing. When it comes to plugging, again, you can start pretty young. You can see we have our kids here pretty young, learning how to hammer in the dowels. We use dowels for our shiitakes. And they're working together. And what I really like about some of these pictures, I noticed after I did it, is the middle picture shows my oldest son kind of being quality control for my younger son. And then the picture to the left is my youngest son now being the teacher. He's a little older in that picture, and now he's quality control for one of my daughters. So, you know, they're really developing here with all the learning. Our kids are also involved in planting ramps on our property. You can kind of see how little they are here, but we've planted over 2,200 ramps on our property, and they've helped with pretty much every single planting day. We've also done a little bit of forest farming with medicinals. So they've learned about golden seal, they've learned about ginseng, they've learned about cohosh, and they've helped in that planting. And then, of course, in our silvopasture, we've planted over 900 trees, and the kids have helped with hundreds of those. So they're out there learning to plant, learning the equipment, and being really proud of what they do. As far as an example from my broader network, so again, those were my kids before, but you know, I have had an opportunity to work with Virginia Tech students. These are undergrads that had heard that I was a mushroom shiitake producer, and they were like, "Hey, I'm interested in that. You know, can I come to your place and learn about that?" And I said, "Sure, come on. You know, we can always use the help." So they came out, and I took the opportunity to teach them about other types of agroforestry. We toured the whole site. They ended up plugging 135 logs, and they took some back home with them. So in a way, there's your ownership piece. They took some back home and were mushroom farmers on their own properties or their own backyards. Here's just a couple pictures from that. You can see the taller people are the Virginia Tech students, and the shorter ones are my kids. And actually, in the far right of the middle picture is one of our friends, Morgan. She's a neighbor kid, and so she came to help too. All right, so that's starting with our own networks. There's the awareness and the engagement piece, but the ownership piece, when you're working with your kids in particular, there's some really neat opportunities to teach entrepreneurship and earning opportunities. So what our kids have done is, once they got big enough to kind of be in charge of the mushroom laying yard, we gave them full responsibility on mushroom harvesting, packaging. They've gone with us for deliveries, and we let them keep the lion's share of the money other than to buy spawn. So they're learning about costs and revenue. It really is nice too, because mushrooms are often producing really low to the ground, and they're very short people. So it really is helpful to have shorter friends helping you harvest. And I'm gonna tell you, you can start teaching someone to harvest at 4 years old. They're pretty good harvesters. All right, so that's your own networks, all the opportunities, or some of the opportunities you could maybe, and that we should all be as practitioners taking to introduce youth and engage youth in agroforestry. But if we want to go beyond that, out into, say, the public or a broader group, you know, how do we do that? And my thought is, there's a lot of great existing youth programs out there that you can tap into and weave agroforestry into their programming. So to identify those potential partners, you really have to kind of think about, like, what are the subject areas that you can learn from agroforestry? And you should also think about what are the learning formats that work well with agroforestry. That's going to help you decide who those partners are. So subject areas are numerous. This is just a few I could think of. I mean, you really could. There's a lot to be learned through agroforestry, but the obvious: agriculture and forestry, lots of environmental sciences, social studies. As I mentioned before, this is, and Ryan's going to talk about this more, but it's not a new practice. And we have a lot to learn from traditional ecological knowledge. That's TEK for some. Ethnobotany, so there's lots of opportunities there. Businesses, marketing, as I mentioned. Nutrition. I mean, if you're doing food forests, there's lots of great lessons for nutrition. And then social emotional learning, like being out in the woods and connecting with nature. And I think Ryan's going to talk about that a little bit too. As far as learning formats that are good for agroforestry, well, I've mentioned a few already: some field trips, workshops, hikes, that kind of thing. Camps, like summer camps, weaving agroforestry lessons into summer camps. Great opportunities there. There's also classroom and program curriculum opportunities. You can do some really cool project-based learning with agroforestry, starting with a problem to doing the design, implementing it, and going through the whole process of that project. Service learning, that's really kind of, I mentioned that before, where you can have people come to your property, help you, or they can go to another, maybe their local school, and help in a service project there. And then, of course, technology is, you can weave that into agroforestry as well, for plant ID apps and online tools, and maybe some others. So then who would the potential partners be for something like this? For sure, first thing that comes to my mind is school-based programs. Things, in the classroom, teachers. Also youth programs, these would be non-school based, and then community events. So these are kind of the three groups that I was originally kind of had in my head. If you break this down and you look at schools, you're talking about like public, private, homeschools, those kind of schools situations. The formats you might use would be developing curriculum for those classrooms. Obviously field trips, we talked about that already a little bit, and maybe some technology opportunities. So for elementary, I see this as a big opportunity. I actually work on a little bit of curriculum development for another science topic. And we're always trying to find ways where we weave in what we're trying to teach to the standards of learning connections that teachers are looking for. And that's how you get teachers to kind of pick up what you're creating there. And there's lots of opportunities for agroforestry. As far as high school age groups go, agriculture programs and horticulture programs are the perfect fit for learning agroforestry. There's actually been a little bit of work done around here for that through the Virginia Ag Education Centers for Innovation. Not in a big part, but in a small part. So it's right for, there's a big opportunity there. Also career and technical education, job readiness. There could be some certifications related to agroforestry that are developed. Those would be great opportunities. And then of course, even just the environmental science related subjects that we talked about before, there might be a teacher teaching ecology and they could weave in some agroforestry lessons there. An example of doing that is actually I did work with a high school ag program here in Floyd County to create a silvopasture workshop. What I did was I provided in-class instruction on agroforestry in general and silvopasture design. So I went into the classroom, I did a couple of sessions, and then the teacher arranged a field trip where those students came out to our property and they planted and protected over 200 trees on our property. So here's a couple of pictures from that. This is, it's a small group, but they were really into it, really excited group. So they came out to our property, that's us getting ready to plant. We planted, like I said, over 200 trees. We used pretty large tree stock, so that's why some of these saplings are pretty big. You see them there learning proper planting techniques, how to inoculate roots with a root inoculant slurry, so they're understanding a little bit about soils and microbiomes. Tree protection, we're putting down some weed mats and some vole guards and some other caging. And so they were just heavily involved, and it was a great day, a great program. Other potential partners through schools, I would say, is if we are thinking about schools and their outdoor classroom opportunities, these would be things like school forests. We have school forests here in Floyd County. Some more rural areas might have those where kids can take hikes and kind of learn about what's out there in the forest and how they might relate to agroforestry. And then school gardens. There's a ton of potential to tap into school gardens, either that already exist or grants that are gotten, because gardens can include trees too. So we shouldn't just be thinking about annual edibles. We can do food forests and not just school gardens. And then there are some school farms out there, and so opportunities to work with those ag teachers to incorporate agroforestry into the school farms. And I just have a few more because I know I'm running low on time. But other potential partners that we talked about was youth programs that are not school-based. So what's out there? I would say this would be one of the biggest ones would be 4-H. They would be a great partner for agroforestry engagement and learning, especially through classroom projects. This gets back to the project-based learning. They specialize in that. So they could be interested in that. And they have a lot of freedom to pick what topics they want to use in their curriculum. So 4-H would be great. And camps, of course, their summer camps could incorporate agroforestry. Through Scouts, I mentioned I was a leader. I'm already incorporating agroforestry. There's about 3 merit badges that work really well with agroforestry. So if you're a Scout leader or you know one, you can talk to them about using or incorporating agroforestry into merit badge lessons. And then Project Learning Tree, that's one I've been involved in for many years. It's really a training for teachers and educators, but they train the teacher and educator, and then they give them curriculum to use in their programs or their classrooms. And they have a really neat theme-based line of curriculum now. And so agroforestry could be one of their theme-based topics for a teacher to choose from. Lastly, community events. These are things like Arbor Day, Earth Day, like county fairs, those kind of things, incorporating agroforestry activities for youth in there. Public gardens and arboreta, I mentioned before, I worked that for many years. So they do a lot of field trips and summer camps. And that would be the perfect place to incorporate lessons on food forests and forest farming. River cleanup and monitoring, so riparian buffers, that's a type of agroforestry practice. And so maybe when there's cleanup, there could be riparian planting with kids. And then other groups that do programming for kids, like Native Plant Society, Master Gardeners, those kind of thing, asking those groups, hey, you know, would you be interested? How could agroforestry fit into what you're doing? And I just have 2 more slides. This is the last one. I just want to make a plug. I know I just said several different existing or potential partners, but I have to say I really, really, really like school-based programs because they really help make access to what you're teaching more equitable. And that's because regardless of your ability to attend a summer camp or go to a festival on a weekend, whatever it is, those kids are going to get it because it's in the schools. It doesn't matter if their parents work 2 jobs and can't take them to things, or they don't have enough money, or whatever it is. So I really do like school-based programs a lot, and I would love to see things develop there with agroforestry. As far as what I think my top 3 easiest entry points, this is my last slide, in K-12 would be our own networks. That's the obvious. You know, we should all be trying to find ways to do that. 4-H is ripe and ready, I would think, for agroforestry engagement, and high school ag programs are the obvious ones to me. And that's all I've got.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dana. I feel like I just got such an amazing like download of like ideas and springboards and jump starts. So what a great presentation. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to let Ryan present, and we'll hear from him for a little bit, and then we'll move into Q&A.
Hey, hello everyone. It's very good to be here. Let me share my screen. Okay. Thumbs up if it's working right.
Yep, you're good.
Perfect. Okay, thank you, Dana. That was a very good overview of all these amazing connections to the youth and agroforestry. So I'm going to add on to that a little bit of overlap, but some applications, practical applications, I think will be complementary for Dana's presentation. So a little bit of background about me and my wife. So we're both ethnobotanists, and ethnobotany is the study of different cultures and how they use plants for food, medicine, metaphor, and those special relationships that people have with plants. And so we've studied agroforestry systems in the South Pacific. So this is in Papua New Guinea, Fiji, and Tonga, and also in Appalachia. And it's really fascinating to think about these indigenous cultures that have been doing this for since the beginning of time, pretty much, right? The human species. Going into the forest and understanding the connections and relationships that these plants have with each other and with the ecosystem, and then how people can kind of get incorporated into that and have that special relationship. And I think it's important to note that they have very strong ethics as it regards to reciprocity with nature and how you're sharing. There's that give and take and that deep gratitude for nature. That's really influenced me and how I think about agroforestry. And so we really value indigenous paradigms and biocultural diversity. And so we do acknowledge that we live on Cherokee land here in Southwest Virginia with UVAYs and also our farm, and appreciate their stewardship of the land. So when I think about engaging youth and young adults in agroforestry, I think of it in 2 different categories. One is a general awareness and outreach, and the other one is more hands-on learning in agroforestry systems. And so the general awareness and outreach includes things like just basically teaching people about how to appreciate plants and how to distinguish them from each other. understanding the value of botanical knowledge in agroforestry, and just generally connecting them back with cultural landscapes, the value of biocultural diversity. And then when you think about hands-on learning, you're applying a lot of different pedagogical techniques and applications. Pedagogy is just the study of learning. So we have things like experimental learning, problem-based learning, inquiry-based learning, place-based learning, and storytelling. So this is kind of like the overview slide. We'll jump into each of these as we go on. This is a picture of two Tongan girls in an agroforestry system planting sandalwood, one of the most valuable hardwood species in the world. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about more of the general awareness and outreach approach. And so I'm not sure how many of you have heard about plant blindness. So sometimes when people are walking down the trail or driving down the street, they just kind of have this foggy perception about there's some trees over here, maybe some grass, right? It's not very detailed in their perceptions of what's around them. And then as we start learning more about plant identification, being able to distinguish plants, and especially when you start learning about the biocultural connections to these plants, then suddenly you start getting a lot more interested in these things. Okay, so then you start noticing, oh, there's some edible flowers, or here's a plant that is a herbal tea that can be used to treat my cold, edible leafy greens to boost my vitamins in my soup. A lot of people think, these plants are just for wilderness survival in case the world ends or something, but people incorporate this food into their diet. There's a concept called sansai in Japanese culture. It's mountain vegetables. They just go up in the mountains and just supplement their diet and their food and their meals with these wild or these semi-domesticated wild-tended plants. Poisons look like the parsley. We met someone in Troll once who was going to go eat some poison hemlock until we told her it wasn't parsley. My students, that was a fun experience for them. Edible nutrient fruit, wild onions, emergency toilet paper, napkin, poison to kill my ex without a trace. I had a student do a whole presentation on that last week. She's a criminal justice major. Emergency fire starter, bark strip for making emergency straps. So you get the idea, right? There's all these connections, and not just for human use, but all these ecological connections, monarch butterfly host plant, a lot of things. And so I think understanding this is like the gateway drug to get into understanding and appreciating agroforestry systems and the concept of food forests and just appreciating the nature around us. So a few examples. So we've hosted educational workshops and hikes. So this is a picture of us at a Girls' Day in STEM, where the fifth grader girls come to our campus and they go to different booths to learn about like how to be a nurse or a doctor, all these different options for STEM disciplines. And I have a booth outside that my kids come and help with and my students come and help with. And basically it's just a storytelling opportunity where we tell the students about a situation where they're out in the forest lost or something, kind of pique their interest. And then we start asking them questions about what they're going to do and how they're going to survive for the few days until they're found. And we introduce concepts about plant identification. And we have a whole lot of medicinal plants we show them and edible plants and other useful plants as well. And they can have taste tests and everything. We also do hikes, kind of like Dana. I'm also with the Scouts, and I remember one time I was hiking with the Scouts, and we picked some flowers from a wood nettle and fried them up in olive oil and salt. And one of the Scouts said it tastes like 1,000 sweet pistachio nuts, which I thought was a fun description. But it just kind of makes them excited. It kind of turns the magic on in their mind and makes them curious. And we also do a lot of interactive games. And we'll get into that in a little bit. One fun game is just after they start learning about plants, you can say, play the game, I'm thinking of a plant. And they start asking questions. You can only ask yes or no questions. So does it have opposite leaves, alternate leaves? Is it used for food, for medicine? And then eventually you get down to the right plant. Something good to do in the car rides after you've been on a hike. So basically just making them curious, the concept of putting salt in their oats for the horses, it makes them want to drink, makes them want to go find that. And a colleague and I wrote a publication called Aligning Plant Identification Curricula to Disciplinary Standards through the Framework of Student-Centered Learning. And so here we talk a lot about these approaches to learning about plant identification. and how you can kind of take it to the next step of that deeper connection and connecting to agroforestry. So I am a college professor, and so I teach classes like ethnobotany, local flora, cultural anthropology. And one thing that we do is we engage the students in educating others. So instead of me just telling them, here's this, we host workshops that help them to be able to teach people how to distinguish edible from poisonous plants. And when the pandemic started, we moved over to YouTube. And so the students make a whole script and make a video about how to connect with these. We have live Facebook events where we have these workshops to answer questions with my students here. And here's a few screenshots of them harvesting grapes and their full prepared meal in the forest. So again, this helps engage the students in a deeper, meaningful way when they're teaching other people about it. They're also creating an interactive educational video game that is basically, how would you say it? I'm trying to summarize it. It's basically learning how to appreciate biocultural diversity in a way that implements agroforestry practices and to be able to sustain simulated livelihoods. Okay, so the students write their openings. They have a Google Doc they all write down together. They're basically writing stories that kind of come into this this greater game. And so basically it's this worldwide pandemic, you know, they have to kind of do this wilderness survival thing, but then as the levels progress, they're learning how to collaborate with other people and share seeds and understand how to basically implement the traditional knowledge and biocultural diversity into survival and civilization thriving. But yeah, so at this stage, we're working through ArcWeave. It's just storyboarding, like the Choose Your Own Adventure storybooks. You get to choose which one you go to. You better not eat the poisonous lookalike to the cattail, or you might get sick and lose points, and so on. So now let's jump to our own farm. Our farm is called the Appalachian Cove Forest Farm and Homestead, and we use this as an educational approach to for younger children as well. It's a demonstration forest farm. We have a lot of homeschool groups come. We have several hundred people come to look and experience the forest farm and the agroforestry systems. And so, as was mentioned before, we practice silvopasture, alley cropping, multifunctional riparian buffers, and coppicing, forest farming. And we do a lot of tending of wild and semi-domesticated edible plants, a lot of other practices as well. Yeah, so like I mentioned before, we have the tours. We also have an audio tour that aired on National Public Radio for several years over Earth Day. And it's my children walking through the forest, kind of talking and interacting with me about the plants and tasting some of the plants too. There's also internship opportunities for young adults and others to be able to work on our farm as well. So these are all different ways that we incorporate the education in the place-based learning. Okay, now let's jump into the second part, looking at experiential learning in agroforestry systems. And so on our own campus, we have about 300 acres on our campus, and we're managing those ecosystems, a lot of wild habitat as well as manicured habitat that we're incorporating these culturally significant plant species into it. So here's just a few pictures of the diversity within our campus. And here's a picture of my students just last week planting ramps on campus. And so we learn about the best place to plant them, and they learn how to propagate them. And I want to zoom into these three here, how much fun they're having with their ramp planting. And I remember, so after some of they also come to our farm to do some forest farming. But I remember one time one student said, I've learned more by coming to the forest farm than a couple of weeks in classes. And then he thought for a minute, he might take offense to that. And says, I mean, I've been paying attention in class and it's really good, but I think what he was recognizing is that it's just the hands-on experience is really a deeper mode of learning than just sitting in a lecture hall. We also do a lot of maple tapping, a lot of research we've done on that on our campus. And here's our students coming to our farm. And so here he took off his headphones and gave it to the goat. And here's some hominy bread we grew from corn that we grew in our alley cropping that a student wrapped a ramp leaf around. And also, just like Dana, we also homeschool our children. And I think this offers a very good opportunity for problem-based learning skills and a lot of other things. So for example, one of my children, well, several of my children, help contribute to spreadsheets. And so here's a spreadsheet of our perennial crop data. And so one of my sons was learning concepts about spreadsheets by just organizing, like in this tab here, it's all of the apple varieties that have disease resistance. And he organized it by which ones are blooming at certain times to make sure they're planted next to each other. And so he was able to learn a lot just by applying this real life problem solving skill to this new skill he's learning with the spreadsheets. They also are able to use mapping to figure out where the plants should go. And they also make these Lego pieces that mark where the different apples are, and they're movable so they can pick them up and move them around as they plan about which ones are going to be pollinating each other and which ones need to be where. So creative, interactive learning opportunities there. Here's them out in the silvopasture planting trees too. And so this is an agroforestry system in Tonga. And so here is my oldest son, who's 21 now. And here he is in our agroforestry system climbing a coconut tree with his friend. I'm actually hiding behind the coconut tree, holding him up there. He's not really climbing it. And some children also in the agroforestry system looking at some insects that we're collecting on this beading sheet. But just understanding about how these children learn about these skills is really amazing. So here's me with a really bad infected toe, and this traditional healer is looking at my toe, fixing it, and she tells her daughter to go into the forest to get a certain plant. And so she's kind of passing on this knowledge to her. When she comes back with the plant, she can give her feedback about if it's the correct plant or not. And then her younger brother is also witnessing the whole thing too. And I mentioned these girls before as well, learning how to plant sandalwood trees within their agroforestry systems. Also, this is important too. I've just spotlighted 3 of my students. So Matthew Sullivan, Jacob Peters, and Evelyn Kepley. They're all my research assistants who are learning about agroforestry systems. They're doing a lot of research on, for example, the sustainable development, the sustainable harvesting of golden seal in these 2 pictures. And Jacob Peters was doing a lot of research on ginseng and on maple tapping. And Jacob Peters now is a PhD student at Yale in their environmental program. Okay, this is the closing picture. It's really fun to watch these students kind of wake up and see these deep connections to the plants and just have a passion for them. I teach ethnobotany class for non-majors, and they're all amazed with how many connections that ethnobotany has to these different disciplines. It's very interdisciplinary, and it's just very satisfying to see these young people wake up and connect with nature. Thank you.
Wow, another excellent presentation. Thank you so much. What a wonderful, wonderful gift to have you share all that with us. And I know it's awkward presenting when everyone's muted, but I assure you we were all chuckling and enjoying. But yeah, so y'all can go ahead and come off mute. We're gonna do what's called our quick fire round before we go into the Q&A. And so these are just, you know, silly, but sometimes useful questions. Let's start with, what was the last flower that you picked?
For me, it was chickweed. And my students and I were eating chickweed in the forest.
Nice.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a good one. It must be so fun to show folks to just the usefulness and relevance of these like weeds.
Yeah.
Dana?
The last plant I ate from the forest.
Or flower you picked
Or
was
flower I
the
picked.
prompt, but yeah.
Well, I actually, we were just harvesting the ramps because we are looking to try making ramp pesto, which I've never made,
Yeah.
but thought and found a recipe and I was like, oh, something new I've never tried. So yeah, so that's the last one. We were just out there harvesting some of the better looking leaves so we could try that out.
Nice. All right. And dogs or cats?
Dogs for me. Although
Dogs.
my daughter
Cats,
behind me would
cats,
disagree.
Good. That's
yeah,
the right answer, y'all.
cats kill too many songbirds.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a total dog person. I didn't want to have to like tell you that I can no longer trust you. So, all right. So we're gonna move into our questions. So either of y'all can hop in at any time on these, and we'll just go for it. So first off, what is a moment of inspiration that you've experienced working with young people in agroforestry? And I know that, you know, for the sake of like, we're leaving young people very broad here. So, you know, just keep it wide open. But a moment of inspiration with young people in agroforestry.
I guess I'll go first. So,
Yeah.
Sure.
I'm always amazed with the natural sense of wonder that young children have.
Mm,
And it's very sad to me when parents or other people discourage that. Like when they don't want them to play in the dirt, they don't want them to pick up spiders and have this curiosity. And I think yeah, so what's inspiring to me is that this is a natural inborn part of our species, in my opinion. I think there's a lot of intuition that we have, and we can connect back to that as we kind of reconnect back with nature. And so that's what inspires me with young children.
mm,
I think for me, and actually we were talking about this the other day, but it just really sticks out in my mind. I had done some talks early on, as maybe 15 years ago, or maybe a little less, but some community talks to some local farmers to try to kind of look at opportunities and kind of spread the awareness about silvopasture in particular, but I was talking about all kinds of agroforestry. And in those classes, so this is my prelude, but or in my sessions, there were a lot of adults that had this body language where their arms were crossed and they just seemed so skeptical and like almost frustrated and by what I was saying, you know, and closed, just closed, you know, closed body, closed, felt like closed mind. They weren't asking questions, nothing. And then when I did that same, this is a few years later, you know, did that same workshop with the high school ag kids, those kids were so excited. They were, you know, they were teenagers. They had some experience with ag. That's why they were in this program. They had been in it for a while, somewhere on farms, but they were leaning forward, like really excited, you know, like, whoa, what else? Let me ask these questions. Let me hear more. Well, what about this? And what about that? And just super engaged and open. And so I just remember thinking, we need to be doing more with youth. I mean, I just remember that moment, like we need to do more with youth because they're going to hear more, I think, you know, or potentially because they're not as like closed off necessarily. They just seem a lot more open. So kind of what you were saying earlier, Ryan, or just now your example. So
yeah, it's beautiful to like that stark contrast between, you know, the sort of developed mind and that open beginner's mind for sure. Um, so when we were prepping and when receiving questions, technology immediately comes up when, you know, thinking about youth and engagement and, you know, getting outside and off the screens. So what have you found for like maybe a sort of hybrid approach or something that can sort of bridge that gap between nature and technology? You all have both already talked about this a little bit, but since, you know, now we are kind of long format and have more time, maybe I'll have more to say about that.
You want to go first this time, Beta?
I'll go first this time. Sure. Well, as I was really prepping for this, you know, I really was getting more in the thick of looking at project-based learning and how that would fit with, say, a 4-H curriculum format, because I was looking at these specific programs, so like how it would fit with 4-H curriculum format or other types of curriculum format, PL project learning tree, that kind of thing. And I just think that the technology piece, of course, it excites kids. It's just naturally they're kind of gravitate that direction. But it also, these are just amazing tools that can really add a lot of depth to any kind of agroforestry lesson or topic. So for example, if you created an agroforestry-based, say or even for a high school ag program, related to designing a food forest, say, or designing a silvopasture for your school farm, right? So then you would go out there, you would make assessments, you would use technology to make some of those site assessments, maybe with some, plant identification apps, maybe some measurement apps. You might go then and use some design software back in the classroom after you've got all your measurements, you plug all that in. So you're laying out this design. You might go online and look up soil types for your area and really dig into that. And there's just a lot of ways you can incorporate these technology things into your project-based learning to really make it exciting for the kids. And like you said, kind of integrate the two, make some overlap there. But then you're still going back out into the field, and then you're still hands-on with the trees, with the plants, that kind of thing. So
Yeah, I like that thought about the holistic, like project-based approach. That makes a lot of sense. Brian?
Yeah, I mentioned a couple of them, like the videos we're making and posting on YouTube and through social media and other things, and the video games. But one thing that we use is iNaturalist. I'm not sure if you all know about what
Mm.
iNaturalist is. It's an app you can use, and you can just take pictures of different plants and animals, and it goes into a larger database that then professionals can identify. And so it's almost like, and you can even make a polygon around a certain area. So even on your own property or your own campus, your own school, and then people can all contribute to that. And pretty soon you have this inventory of the life that's around you. It's really fun. And at our school, we have an iPad initiative where each student is given an iPad as part of the curriculum, so they can incorporate it into curriculum. And so on the iPad, I have a little program, it's a keynote like PowerPoint, where they can engage in a kind of a scavenger hunt. And so the task is to go in the forest and find plants that have opposite leaves or alternate leaves, different kind of leaf tips. And they go there and they just click on that button, take a picture of it. They find the next one, take a picture of it, and they come back to class and we talk about that. So that's another fun little game you can do too.
Yeah, it seems, like the technology piece of the puzzle has become obligate to the situation. It's kind of, I don't know, sort of what I'm hearing just listening to you talk about the different ways that y'all are approaching this. It seems like it's just a necessary kind of baked in piece now, which is really interesting. A follow-up question that someone had asked is how do you engage with kids who are more interested in technology than the natural world, like the kids who don't want to get off the screens?
I mean, we have so for example, with the video game we're creating, there are some students who are very interested in coding, right? And so we have delegations and they are in charge of taking these stories that the other students are creating and kind of applying it onto the code in the background so that the video game developers, that's not me, can take it the next step, right? And so sometimes we have delegations so they can still feel connected to the greater team, but it's still connected to the agroforestry too.
and
Do you
some
have
games.
something? Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, involving those groups more in maybe even kind of looking into things, finding information, could be good. I do think that population of kids, though, or I've found anyways, those kids too, if you can find engaging ways to get them out, and it's not to say you ignore that they have a strong interest in that and that you're trying to necessarily change them, but I do think that sometimes those kids, given the opportunity to get out and connect in a different way, a new way they've never connected before. I mean, it's in human nature. They get excited. They eventually, they may discover something about themselves that they didn't know. So I think there's that too, to kind of recognize. And yeah.
To sort of piggyback on that, do you think that, this is such a different time, and things are changing so quickly with technology and AI. Do you feel like today's youth, or maybe even just youth in general, are like uniquely suited to agroforestry in any particular way? Yeah, I don't know. I'll let that sit. I'll let them marinate for a second and you can hop in.
I think sometimes youth are concerned about the environment. And I think agroforestry and these different traditional ways of producing food and medicine has a lot of answers in it that are going to be able to come up with new strategies for adapting, because we're going to have to be adapting. I think the younger generation is recognizing that, the need for adaptation. And I think there's a lot of answers in this, especially after they're introduced into it and they understand the potential.
That was exactly where my mind went to, is just the kind of the awareness that the kids have of the changing climate and the changing things that are around them changing outside. I think they have a real concern. I mean, they're young, they're wondering what's going to happen. I think they're very anxious about it. Not maybe all kids, but a lot of kids, even at a young age. So understanding the benefits from a climate standpoint of agroforestry practices, and kind of the intelligence of that design in all those different practices, agroforestry practices. Yeah, it can be part of the solution that maybe they're kind of wishing there was an answer or a solution, maybe that would excite them.
Yeah, it's interesting. The next question that we had was, are you seeing climate change as a driver for solutions-oriented engagement among youth? So that's a hard yes, it sounds like. There's one down further in the list that I feel like makes sense right now. Let's see if I can. Oh, so how do you find ways to like tackle okay, so we're working on a long timeline, right, with most agroforestry, and agroforestry isn't all trees, as we noted, but like, a substantial piece of it is. So do you find that there's issues getting, like, in this like instant world, getting the youth to sort of like connect or like have ownership with this like really long, really slow, drawn out timeline that these systems are often working in? Like, how do you see that like spark interest, or like turn switches on or off for them? Like, what are you seeing?
I think they have to look beyond the task at hand, and that is why it's so good to get them, say, in the forest, because there's so much more to do there and see there and experience there than just checking on the ramps, or checking on the whatever, so I think it's a potential opportunity to practice slowing down and just being quiet and listening. And we do a lot of that with our kids, and I've done that with other kids. When I was working in Seattle, I was working inner city, so I worked in super urban and with super urban kids, and we would take them out and on field trips and we had gotten different grants and stuff, and we did a lot of let's just sit, everyone be as quiet as you can, and that was fun because they don't ever do that, or at least this group, when it was just kind of foreign, and so they heard things and recognized things, and kind of like your picture, Ryan, of like driving the plant blindness. I think there's also other blindnesses, of like, when you're in the woods, there's so much going on around you that you just don't even see or hear unless you stop. So I don't know.
What a gift to give people to just facilitate a moment of quiet. Truly, that you're right, it's so rare.
I just did what Dana said. I'm not sure if I could add anything else.
So since we're in Techlandia here, social media, challenges, opportunities within that, specific to agroforestry, or just, in terms of just natural world engagement. We've talked tech a little bit, but is there anything social media specific?
There's a lot of influencers. There's a lot of really fun, like TikTok users, Instagram people who are doing wild foraging, for example, and talking about sustaining the land and things like that. So they're very engaging too with the youth. Yeah, and then of course I mentioned before we use the Facebook for those workshops and community education outreach.
Yeah, I would ditto the Facebook as a form of communication, a tool for communication. I mean, it really is a great way to make connections and for people to find what they're interested in too. So, but and I would say that's just a world it is kind of foreign. And when because I just don't engage that way. But I know that when I was teaching it back when I was teaching middle school and high school, things like that, I would ask the kids. I would be like, okay, I want to do X. I know you guys are on this all the time. Instagram was more popular than it is now, but what would you want to do? Like if it's TikTok, would you want to do some kind of cool, assignment should I come up with? It has to be related to this. It has to include this. It has to, and then have them come up with some cool assignment that, involves social media. Well, they'll think of something and it would be fun, it'd be really, I would learn something too,
Yeah, give them an excuse to do something they already want to do, but kind of
Yeah.
massage the circumstances a little bit.
Yeah. And they get a lot of buy-in that way too. So
Yeah.
And there's also the groups too, like the I don't know what they call them, the interest groups, I guess, in the different
Mhm.
platforms.
Yeah, just
You can
Facebook
have
groups.
questions, yeah,
yeah.
answers and kind of yeah.
That does seem like the last vestige of like Facebook positivity out there. It's like the groups. Like I'm in a tree hay group on Facebook and it's like the happiest, like nicest group of people. I'm like, oh, they're still out there. So switching gears just a little bit, how do you think we might use agroforestry to sort of reframe the image of farming for young people? I feel like, as we all know, it's like the average age of the farmer. It's like every time there's a census or whatever the data comes out, they're just like a year or two older, and it's like, mid to late 60s. And so many young people, either they think it's like this really sexy, amazing job that they want to do, or they think it's like going to be like dirt poor, backbreaking, thankless labor, So it's like this group is already sold. So, how can we use agroforestry to sort of, I don't know, to sort of reshape that? Like, do y'all have thoughts on that?
I think it kind of goes back to the idea about adaptation strategies and being passionate about the environment and seeing that this could be a potential solution. It's not like all of our food's going to be produced in agroforestry, maybe. But I think it's going to be more and more popular and more important. And so, yeah, it's just fun to be like Matthew was saying in the comments, it's just let's get in the shade, right? It's not all this hard work in the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's true. The shade. I've often said that it's more fun to be working in the forest than tending tomatoes out in the sun, whatever. But
Heck yeah.
heck yeah. But I think that for a long time people thought of farming and like big ag and like big fields and combines, and you had to kind of do it in this real specific way. And then really kind of the resurgence of like homesteading and self-sufficiency, and people are really into kind of this, or getting more into it. I mean, it comes and goes. I mean, it's not like this is the first time, but having that self-sufficiency, having that capacity to, like you were talking, like you had that activity. I love that, Ryan, where they like went out and they found their dinner in the woods. Like that's so empowering. And so things like that, if it can be framed that way, agroforestry is a way to create sufficiency and resilience. And like you were saying before, and it's not the old way of thinking with farming. It's so much more now. Maybe that framing it that way gets people jazzed and kind of puts a new face on it, so to speak, or a new spin on it. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, in general with farming, like trees just aren't a part of our like picture of farming. If you Google agriculture and do an image search, there's no trees, and it's like we've kind of forgotten that that's an option. So I feel like, sort of inoculating youth with that idea is really powerful.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take a second to remind our attendees that if you have a direct question you would like answered, please submit it in the questions function. I am not monitoring the chat right now because I'm busy doing other things, obviously, but I see that the Q&A is blank. I can ask questions all night, but I want to make sure that if y'all have questions, you get them into that Q&A function so I can ask them. But we will take a minute to do a second little quick fire round. Starting with, what is your favorite farm tool?
Like a
Oh,
physical
fun.
tool you can hold.
Yeah.
So I can't use
Yeah.
I can't use intuition as a tool.
Hey, I think that's a great answer.
I don't know. Mine's probably the trowel. I know this sounds silly, but I'm thinking really boiled down to just me. If I pick up anything, it's my sharp trowel.
Mm,
A serrated edge and my sharpened end, and I can do all kinds of stuff with that. So that's the thing I probably drag around and use the most.
yeah.
Maybe a digging fork too, to harvest roots and rhizomes from the forest. Yeah, I was using it the other day for Appalachian wasabi crinkle root. It's for
Mm,
that.
oh, fun. You know what I've been so excited about lately are like those little, I think the brand is Listo, those little wax pens. They write on anything and it lasts forever and
Oh,
it doesn't fade in the
Oh,
sun. They're like
that's
a souped up grease pen and you can buy little new cartridges for them. They've been around forever and they make them in all different colors. I am like preaching the gospel of those right now. I'm like, this is the best thing I do a lot of nursery work. It's I gotta like label everything all the time. So I've been on that train. Okay. This this could split the room, but what is the correct way to make a PB&J sandwich?
oh my gosh.
You guys have kids, so I'm sure that you have experience.
What are the options? Is there like
I don't know. What are the options?
so
I've heard people get into some pretty comical arguments about this
you could start by harvesting some acorns
though.
and taking the tannins out of it and making your own cornbread with it, acorn bread.
oh
And
yes.
there's the native wild peanut you can collect and some wild berries and make some jam out of that.
Heck yeah.
But you were wondering about like if there's peanut butter on
I
both sides.
want to. Is there? I want to come eat one of your PB&J sandwiches, though.
Sounds cool. You're saying, should we put peanut butter on the bread or put the jar of
If the
peanut
jam would,
butter?
if you put peanut butter on both sides, the jam won't get. It depends on if you're having a picnic. If you're eating it right then, or if you're going to be holding it for a couple hours.
Ooh, yeah.
I actually do. Yeah, I put peanut butter on both sides and jam in the middle so that the bread doesn't get soggy if I'm going to be eating it like hours later.
You know,
Mhm.
that's very
But
clever. I
if I'm
might,
not, I don't care about it. I just put peanut butter on one side, then eat it.
I think I've always been making peanut butter and jelly so fast that I don't know, like laying it all out. How many do we need? 7 sandwiches. Okay.
Mhm. It's got the assembly line. Well, we don't have to solve it. It's just,
Yeah.
it's one of those fun questions. All right. Let's see. So we have a request to just connect in general. I'm sure that can be arranged. I'm just going to keep rolling because I am only like halfway through the pre-submitted questions. So, are there currently any formal agroforestry trainings or like educational opportunities for youth? Like, it sounds like there are some localized things. Do y'all know of anything a little more broad scale, or even if you just want to plug programs again in the area, camps, classes, etc. It sounds like Ryan that I know you said you teach ethnobotany to non-majors. Is that like an auditable class? Anything in that scope is useful.
I mean, there's a program at UVAY's that pays public school teachers to come onto campus to I don't know all the terms for the public school teachers. Maybe you don't know, Dana, you have to renew your education with new.
Yeah, you have to get a certain number of credits and they usually do it in the
Yeah.
summers. Yep, yep.
Yeah, so we have one of those for middle school teachers that come onto campus, and so there's a couple of days we do forest farming and edible plants, things like that. That then they can make into their own lesson plans, take it back to their schools to understand how they can implement it. So that's one program.
That's important, and I didn't really bring it up in my talk, but I mean, honestly, that's a huge part of getting programs to the youth. You have to get the teachers excited about them, or they are not going to pick them up. I mean, there is some choice.
Mm.
They are bound by the SOLs, the standards of learning, and they're bound by certain things, but they still have choice. And if they have no awareness of agroforestry, or if they know about it, but they're not particularly excited about it, they're not going to pick it. So the thing, what you're talking about, Ryan, is that's great that that opportunity exists. And,
Yeah, and there's
yeah, so more of those would really help get to the youth,
yeah, and we have a new graduate program in education, and so there's other education teachers here, professors here that help them understand how it all connects to the SOLs, and so they make their lessons plans in the context of those.
Mhm.
Which leads us into the next one is, where does agroforestry overlap with what's already happening in the classroom? Seems like a great place to find inroads with teachers, da, da, da. So that's what you just mentioned. I'm wondering if you can speak specifically to SOLs at all, like if there are some, I don't know, like Dana in particular, like if experientially you've seen like this particular thing can be weaved into this particular curriculum kind of thing.
Third, fourth, and fifth grade SOLs fit really, really well with agroforestry. So, and I work, my main job is I work in entomology for the Department of Entomology at Virginia Tech. And I do youth programming related to entomology. And that's another type of science that's a little less, well-known and a little fringe or whatever. I mean,
Yeah,
it just,
maybe could you just like define entomology real briefly?
oh, I'm sorry, study of insects.
Gotcha.
So, sorry. So
No,
study,
no, just yeah, just to make
yeah.
everybody on the same
Yeah,
page.
so study of insects, and so I'm just dissecting the SOLs and trying to find, like you said, inroads. Like, what do they need to know? What do the teachers have to teach? And so the same kind of things that they use, like for entomology programming, agroforestry programming can work really well. And those would be things like habitats, food webs, adaptations, interconnectedness. Well, that's kind of food webs, but it's a little slightly different. But those are some basic stuff that teachers are constantly, they're trying to teach it as exciting as possible. So if there's kind of a new idea, a new concept, especially that kids have never heard of, they really like it. They're like, yes, thank you. And so
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially when you apply
that's third, fourth, and fifth. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, especially when you apply the problem-based learning approaches to it, and the hands-on experiences too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Works well with like a field trip type of situation. Like I often think about, and this is again just local to what I'm familiar with, but around Virginia Tech. I mean, Virginia Tech has got lots of outdoor learning labs, and if so, opportunities to come visit Kentland Farm or come visit Catawba or come visit these places, and have a field trip program that was SOL oriented, but then based on agroforestry. It would be a win-win. The kids would get exposed, the teacher would get exposed, the teacher gets all their SOLs covered, so it's it could be a pretty
Nice.
opportunity. Yeah.
Very cool. So speaking of field trips, are there any like special concerns for people to be thinking about in terms of just field safety with like young or inexperienced people? I was almost thinking about it in reverse, Ryan, with your students being able to like point out the poisonous plant
yeah.
to someone. So they were like being the field safety people, but yeah, just any like particular like, tips, tricks, things you've learned.
Yeah, some of my students are very terrified of snakes and spiders. And so sometimes they're very hesitant to go into the forest because of those fears. And they come out of the forest thinking, I didn't see any snakes or
Yay.
yeah. One concern I have with this is on our campus, I'm trying to make sure that there's representative plants along sidewalks and along places where handicap accessibility could be,
Hmm.
could be considered. Because I have had a student in the past who was not able to walk like some of the other students, and so I adapted the class, and a lot of the field trips were just closer to the place where they could reach to, and then we had other optional field trips that went further out in the forest too. So this handicap accessibility has been on my mind too.
So we have time for one more question. And maybe two, we'll see. I'm going to start with this one, and if we have time, we'll finish with one last. But have you seen much success with school-based food forest as opposed to like school gardens? You know, the complexity, the diversity that can be like really confusing and scary sometimes to administrators or planners. If you could speak to that.
Yeah, so I've been at a college where we had a summer a community garden, and the main constraint there is that not many students are there over the summer when we need most work in the garden. But with forest farming, it seems like a lot of the work is in the spring and the fall. And so for on our campus, for example, I'm focusing a lot on plants that ripen in the fall or are harvestable in the fall or in the early spring. And it doesn't take as much management. The forest farming doesn't take as much management as the community garden, the traditional vegetable garden.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits I always thought about with food forests. Was exactly what you're talking about, because any school gardens I've been involved with, there had to be this like workforce of summer people to even keep it going. But the food forest, I just was digging around for this talk because I was kind of curious, and there are food forests out there and there's a big program in Florida. I put a link in my slide, it's called Food Forest for Schools, and it's in the Miami-Dade County. And they've gotten a ton of money. They've created a ton of curriculum. This goes back to your other question about, is there curriculum out there? They've gotten 5 schools involved, and they've done all this stuff, and these are real urban areas. And I think it's been really successful. They had amazing pictures online. So that excited me. I know very little about it. Like I said, I found it kind of prepping for this talk, but I think there's stuff out there, to be borrowed. That's the thing about all this stuff is like, don't recreate the wheel. You don't have to start from scratch. There's just so many things that creative people have already done. It's trying to make those connections, and yeah.
Yeah, it does seem like increasingly there's just so many replicable patterns, and it really is amazing. And Ryan, with the plant ID, like that was actually one of the questions that we had ahead of time, was like, where do you start with plant ID for kids? And it's like, oh, Ryan's cracked that. And in particular, where can is that a public resource that can be found?
Yeah, I almost was going to pull it up, but we just, it was limited time. But it's called Food Forest for School. It's funded through the Education Fund. I mean, I could put that. Let me put the link.
Yeah, if you can drop the link in the chat. And then Ryan, is that the plant ID, is that available for everybody, or is that like proprietary?
No, it's a book. It's a chapter in a book that was published, I think, in 2013. If there's
Okay.
show notes, I can put a link into it maybe.
Okay, very cool. Awesome. All right, with that, it is 8 o'clock. We are at the close. Thank you so much. That went really quickly. What a fascinating, fun, exciting topic. And, it's just always, it's uplifting to just think about the positivity and the potential in young people. It just always is a nice boost. So thank you all so much for coming on and sharing.
Yeah, thank you so
time.
much. I learned a lot from Ryan. I took a bunch of notes, Ryan. I got some cool ideas from you. Thank you. That was so great.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to reach out to either of us, I'm sure, we're open to communicating with y'all too.
Awesome. Yes, and all the registrants will get a follow-up email. So if there's any details you would like to include in that, we can send those out with that as well. But thanks so much, everybody. Have a lovely rest of your week. Hopefully we'll see you in May for our session on land access. And then we'll be taking a little break for a while until it's time to kick it back off in the fall. So thanks for being here, and take care.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.